I knew something was wrong the moment my 6-year-old son squeezed my hand so tightly his knuckles went white. We were standing in the bustling departure hall of SkyWest Regional Airport, watching my younger sister Serena roll her sleek suitcase toward the TSA line heels, clicking like a metronome against polished tile. She glanced back once, offering me a smile I had seen 1,000 times, the kind that looked warm to everyone else but carried a sharp chill beneath it. The kind that meant she'd already decided something for me without asking. I had lived under that smile most of my life. But I never expected that on this bright, unremarkable Tuesday morning, it would be the last warning I'd get before everything in my world burned down literally. Because when Serena disappeared behind the safety barrier, my son tugged me down to his height, looked up with frightened eyes, far too old for his little face, and whispered, "Mom, we can't go back home." This morning I heard Auntie planning something bad for us. Those words didn't just frighten me. They cut through me like a blade I never saw coming. I stared at Micah, certain I had heard him wrong. His voice wavered just enough that the echo of those few words bad for us lodged themselves in my chest. Behind us, the automatic doors whooshed open and closed, letting in gusts of cool air mixed with the faint scent of coffee from the kiosk nearby. People laughed, rolled suitcases rushed toward gates, hugged goodbyes. Life moved. But mine paused. "What did you say, sweetheart?" My voice cracked on the last word. Micah swallowed hard the way he did when he was trying to be brave even though he was terrified. "Mom, we can't go home." He didn't blink. He didn't fidget. He didn't smile that nervous smile children give when they exaggerate or invent a story. His fear was steady anchored, real. For a moment I just stood there, gripping his little hand, staring at the space where Serena had just been. My sister. My only sibling. The woman I spent my entire life defending, smoothing things over for covering when she made mistakes. She had just blown me a kiss before walking off to a business trip she'd bragged about for weeks. And now my son, my quiet, observant, almost eerily perceptive little boy, was telling me she had planned something terrible. "Micah," I whispered, leaning closer. "Start from the beginning. What did you hear?" He glanced around nervously, as if afraid someone standing nearby might listen. "I woke up early this morning. Really early. I went to get water and I heard Auntie Serena in the kitchen. She wasn't alone. I felt the first drop of dread slide down my spine. She was talking to a man," he continued, voice tightening. "I didn't see him, but he said, 'Tonight everything ends.' And Auntie said, 'Good. Make it look like an accident.'" My breath hitched. "Are you sure?" Baby Micah nodded so quickly it nearly hurt to watch. "She sounded scary, Mom. Not like Auntie. Like someone else." A shiver went through me. Serena had always had an edge, sharp ambition, sharp opinions, sharp moods, but I'd never heard her speak in a voice my son could describe as scary. Something about that alone made my stomach twist. Airport noise swirled around us, but everything felt muffled, like I had cotton stuffed in my ears. My pulse thudded so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I wanted to deny what Micah was saying. I wanted to tell him he must have misunderstood, that his aunt, though flawed, would never harm us. But the thing is, there were signs, little ones I had brushed aside. Serena insisting we keep the house under her name for convenience. Serena pushing to switch our home insurance to a higher tier in case of emergencies. Serena telling me not to work again, that she would take care of everything even though she had never taken care of anyone but herself. And now my son was telling me she planned something that would end tonight. Suddenly I was aware of how cold the light felt in the terminal. Too bright. Too sterile. As if the world was suddenly a stage where I had been cast in a role I didn't understand. "We're going home," I murmured automatically, mostly out of habit, but Micah clutched my arm. "No, Mom." His voice was urgent. "We can't go back. Please believe me this time." Those last 4 words hit me in a way nothing else could have. Because this wasn't the first time Micah tried to warn me about something, and I dismissed it as a child's imagination. Weeks ago, he said there was a strange car parked across from our house 3 nights in a row. Serena brushed it off, told him he was too imaginative. And in a moment, I regret more than anything, agreed with her. Days later, he said Serena yelled at someone over the phone saying, "She won't be in my way much longer." I told him adults say things they don't mean. And now I was looking at my child and realizing Serena had groomed me to ignore my own instincts. This time I would not ignore him. I crouched down and gripped his shoulders. "Okay, I believe you." The relief on his face nearly made me cry right there on the airport floor. "But we can't just disappear," I continued, swallowing. "We need to see what's going on first. Then we figure out what to do." I stood, took his hand firmly, and walked us toward the exit. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. Every step was made of ice. Outside, the sky was a clear, pale blue. I unlocked our car, a modest silver SUV Serena had helped me buy last year. A chill slithered through me at the thought, why had she pushed so hard for me to choose this exact model? Why had she insisted she handle the paperwork? I buckled Micah in. "We're going to take a different route, okay?" I said. "We're not driving straight home." Micah nodded. He trusted me completely. It was time I learned to trust him too. I pulled out of the airport lot and took the long road toward our neighborhood, avoiding the obvious turns just as Serena had taught me to do when she suspected someone was following her during her more paranoid business phases. I used to laugh at her for those routines. Now I followed them religiously. My heart pounded the entire drive. When we reached our neighborhood, I didn't pull into our driveway. Instead, I parked on a side street behind a large row of eucalyptus trees. From this angle, we could see our house just barely, but no one inside the house could see us. Micah pressed his hands to the window, peering through the leaves. "Mom, it looks normal." "Yes," I whispered. "It does." But my instinct screamed nothing about this situation was normal. And when instinct screams, I've learned the hard way, listen. For several minutes we watched. Nothing happened. Just the soft sway of the porch swing Serena gifted me last Christmas. The curtains drawn neatly. The stillness that wrapped the whole place like a blanket. Then Micah gasped. "Mom, that car." A dark SUV glided slowly down our street. Not speeding, not lost. Moving like a predator, absolutely certain of its prey. My breath caught. The SUV rolled to a stop, directly in front of our house. 2 men stepped out. Not neighbors, not delivery drivers, not maintenance workers. They wore dark clothing gloves. Their movements were intentional. And then the moment that cracked the world in half, one of them pulled out a key, inserted it into our lock, turned it. The front door opened smoothly. Micah's voice trembled behind me. "Mom, how do they have Auntie's key?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. Only 3 people in the world had keys to that door, Serena, and the spare Serena kept locked in her bedroom drawer. The men disappeared into the house, through our living room, past our hallway, toward the staircase. Their flashlight beams flickered through the curtains like lightning bugs caught in a jar. "What do we do?" Micah asked, voice tiny shaking. "We wait," I whispered, though my pulse hammered so loudly I barely heard myself. Then the smell hit. A sharp chemical tang that didn't belong anywhere near a house. Micah covered his nose. "Mom, what is that?" I leaned closer to the open window. Smoke thin at first slipped out from beneath the shingles. Then more. Gray turning darker. My throat closed. "No," I whispered. Orange light flared behind the living room windows, a glow that grew and pulsed and swelled. Fire. Real, hungry fire. Micah cried out, choking on fear. "Mommy, they're burning our house!" I grabbed him, pulling him close even as my eyes watered from the smoke curling into the night air. Flames licked the curtains, then exploded outward. The porch swing caught. The windows shattered outward in bursts of glass and fire. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Serena. "Love you, sis. Hope you and Micah are resting well. I'll call when I land." The world tilted sharply. Fire roared in front of me, and in my hand a message from the person who was supposed to love me most. Pretending to care, while making sure we burned alive. Micah sobbed into my side. "Mom, we would have been in there." "Yes," I whispered, voice shaking uncontrollably. "We would have. And because of him, we weren't." Sirens wailed in the distance. The dark SUV sped away without headlights, disappearing into the night like ghosts. I didn't chase it. I didn't move. I just held my son and watched my life, every photo, every memory, every corner of the place I tried to make safe turn into a tower of flames. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into the burning house and claw out pieces of the past with my bare hands. But Micah clung to me, small and trembling, reminding me what truly mattered. We were alive. Barely. But alive. As firefighters arrived, shouting commands and dragging hoses across the asphalt, I backed away into the shadows. No one saw us. No one knew we had been there. We were ghosts watching our own funeral. Micah tugged my sleeve. "Mom, what do we do now?" I forced myself to breathe, though each inhale felt like swallowing glass. "We leave," I said softly. "We don't go near the flames. We don't ask for help yet. We don't let anyone know we survived." "Why?" he whispered. "Because Serena would make sure the second attempt succeeded." But I couldn't tell him that. I pressed a kiss to his forehead. "We'll figure it out. I promise." The fire crackled behind us, devouring everything. And as I led Micah away from the only home we had ever known, one truth pulsed through my blood. My sister didn't just want us out of her life, she wanted us dead. And tonight, I finally believed it. I drove without seeing anything but the blur of streetlights streaking across the windshield. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles throbbed, but I didn't loosen them. Not when my son's breaths were shaky. Not when smoke still clung to my clothes like a warning. Not when every part of me screamed to run, but had no idea where to go. Micah sat in the back seat, clutching his dinosaur backpack like it was armor. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, making sure he was still there, still breathing, still whole. Every few seconds he would look up, and our eyes would meet as if he was checking the same thing about me. Neither of us spoke for a stretch of road that felt endless. When we finally pulled into a deserted parking lot behind a row of closed medical offices, I turned off the engine. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like another person sitting in the car with us. Micah's voice was barely audible. "Mom, are we safe?" I looked out through the windshield at the empty asphalt shimmering faintly under the security lights. Safe wasn't something I'd felt in years. I just hadn't known it. "We're safer than we would have been," I murmured. "That's what matters right now." Micah hesitated, curling his legs up under him. "I heard more than what I told you." My chest tightened. "Tell me everything, baby." He leaned forward in his seat, his eyes big and dark in the dim light. Auntie Serena wasn't alone this morning. There was a man with her. He had a deep voice. He said, "Tonight everything ends." And she said, "Good. I'll be on the plane. No loose ends." The phrase hit me like a smack of ice water. No loose ends. And there was a paper on the table. Micah continued. It looked like a map. I think it was our house. My nails dug into my palms. She hadn't just snapped. She had planned, strategized, rehearsed. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" he asked suddenly, voice trembling. "Is she mad because I told you about the car? Or the phone call? Did that make her want to—" "No," I cut in, turning fully toward him. "Micah, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Serena makes her own choices. And what she did has nothing to do with you being good or bad. You're the reason we're alive." He blinked, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. I climbed into the back seat, pulling him into my arms and letting him cry until his breathing steadied again. When he finally rested his forehead on my shoulder, I whispered, "We have to think carefully about our next steps." He nodded against me. I returned to the driver's seat and stared out through the windshield again. The night felt too still, too watchful. I needed answers, not just fear, and the only place we could get answers was the place I most dreaded returning to. "We need to see what's happening at the house," I said slowly. "Not up close, not where anyone can see us. Just from a distance." Micah wiped his face. "Okay." I drove again, taking a different route, one Serena wouldn't expect. She always predicted my routines, anticipated my movements. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction this time. When we neared our street, my heart kicked against my ribs. Even through thick eucalyptus branches and the darkness of the sidewalk, I could still smell smoke hanging in the air, the ghost of what we'd escaped. I parked between two towering trees, shutting off the lights, so we were swallowed by the dark. From here, our house sat faintly visible at the end of the block, illuminated by street lamps and emergency lights cast from fire engines. A few neighbors lingered outside their homes, their silhouettes small and uncertain. And the house, our house, was still smoldering, the roof, a jagged black outline against the sky. Micah pressed his face to the window. "Mom, look." A police cruiser rolled slowly down the street. Firefighters continued to spray the remaining hotspots. The chaos we'd witnessed earlier had simmered into exhaustion and ash. But I wasn't looking for fire, or police. I was looking for the SUV. And it wasn't there. For a moment, relief washed over me. Then dread replaced it. If the SUV was gone, the men were gone too. Maybe reporting back. Maybe regrouping. Maybe following orders for whatever Serena wanted next. I inhaled deeply through my nose, but the smoke scratched the inside of my throat. Memories flashed against my eyelids. Serena insisting we move my name off the utility accounts. Serena pushing me to sign papers without reading them. Serena snapping at me last week when I asked why she was researching property transfers. Little cracks in the foundation I hadn't noticed or had chosen not to. Micah tugged my sleeve. "Mom, I'm scared." "I know." My voice quivered despite my effort to stay calm. "We're going to figure this out. Will Auntie find us? Not tonight." I forced the words out. "Not if we're careful." He nodded but kept staring at the smoldering remains of what used to be home. The same house where I had read him bedtime stories, built forts out of blankets, watched cartoons with him on lazy Saturdays. Now it was a ruin that still glowed at its edges. Minutes stretched by. My back ached from tension. My jaw hurt from clenching it too long. I was about to say we should leave when I noticed something, a pair of headlights turning onto the far end of the street. My breath froze. The car moved slowly, far too slowly for someone simply passing through. Micah pressed closer to me. "Is that them?" "No," I whispered. "Different car." But my nerves were shot. Every vehicle felt like a threat. Every shadow like an ambush. I sank lower in my seat, gently nudging Micah to do the same. The car passed indifferent, not slowing, not watching. But it didn't matter. The panic already pulsed through me like electricity under my skin. "We need help," I murmured. Micah looked at me as if he'd been waiting for those words. I thought of who could possibly help us. Not Serena's friends, they all adored her. Not my coworkers, they barely knew my personal life. Not neighbors, they'd run straight to Serena if they saw us. And then, from a place deep in my memory, a voice surfaced. My mother's voice, faint but steady. "If one day you don't know who to trust, call Grace Armitage." Grace. My mother's lawyer. Older, sharp-tongued private. Someone Serena had always disliked. Maybe that was enough reason to trust her. We couldn't stay in the car forever. I started the engine again and backed away from the curb, my eyes fixed firmly on the remains of our house for the last time. As we pulled away, Micah asked, "Where are we going?" To someone who might know what to do. He nodded, exhausted and scared, but willing to trust me completely. Half an hour later, we arrived at an old brick building in Glendale Grace's office. The parking lot was empty except for a single lamppost flickering like a tired heartbeat. I parked and slipped out, carrying Micah in my arms because his legs had gone limp from all the fear and fatigue. The office door was locked. I hesitated, then knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Grace stood there wearing reading glasses and a soft gray sweater, her silver hair pulled into a loose bun. She didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, she looked resigned, as though she had been expecting this moment for years. "Leora," she said softly. "Come in." I stepped inside, holding Micah close. Grace locked the door behind us, bolting 2 chains and sliding a heavy wooden bar in place. My stomach dropped at the implication she knew we needed more than privacy. We needed protection. She motioned toward an old leather sofa. "Set the boy down. He's exhausted." I lowered Micah onto the cushions. He curled up without protest, his tiny hands gripping his backpack. Grace studied me with the kind of gaze that sees beyond excuses and half-truths. "What happened?" she asked. And just like that, the dam inside me broke. The words spilled out everything. From Serena's trip to Micah's warning, to the men with the key to the fire, to the text Serena sent, pretending she cared. Grace didn't stop me or interrupt. Her face remained composed, but her eyes darkened with each detail. When I finished my throat raw, she nodded slowly. "I knew your mother feared this," she murmured. "I just hoped she was wrong." Micah stirred but didn't wake. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. Her hand steady even though mine shook. "Your sister is not who you think she is," Grace said quietly. "And now that she believes you're dead, she may feel safe. But the moment she suspects otherwise, she'll try again." A chill cut through my spine. "So, what do we do?" I whispered. Grace set her coffee down, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a thick folder. "This," she said, placing it on the table, "is everything your mother discovered about Serena before she died, and it's time you saw it." She flipped it open. The first page had my sister's name in bold letters. I felt my heart sink as the truth finally began to unfold. Grace looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Tonight, Leora, we start fighting back." And for the first time since the flames consumed my home, something inside me sparked to life again. Not hope, not yet, but determination, and that was enough to keep me breathing. The folder lay between us like a living thing, thick with papers that seemed to hum with secrets. My hands hovered above it, trembling as if touching it would somehow make everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. Grace didn't rush me. She simply sat back in her chair, watching me with eyes that had seen far more darkness than most people ever would. "You should read the first page," she said quietly. I did. At the top in my mother's handwriting, neat, slanted unmistakably, hers were the words, "Serena Hale, Private Findings. Commissioned by Evelyn Hale." My breath stalled. My mother... She hired someone to investigate Serena. Grace nodded slowly. "Your mother saw things you didn't, things she hoped would disappear with time. But they didn't." I kept staring at the words. "Private Findings," the letters blurring slightly as my eyes filled. My mother died 3 years ago. She never told me any of this. She protected me from something she feared, but didn't want to burden me with. "She loved both of her daughters," Grace added softly, "but she feared one of them." I closed my eyes, letting that sink in like a stone dropping into water. When I finally opened the folder, the first page revealed a timeline. Serena, age 14. Altercation at school. Aggressive behavior. Manipulative tendencies toward peers. Age 17. Forgery of parent signature to withdraw funds. Age 22. Accusations of sabotaging coworker project. Age 26. Gambling behavior noted. Excessive spending. My throat tightened. Some of these things I vaguely remembered small incidents Serena brushed off, twisted into misunderstandings. Others I never knew at all. I thought she was ambitious, I whispered. That's what everyone always said. Driven, confident, assertive. Ambition isn't the problem, Grace replied. Lack of empathy is. The next few pages were records bank transfers. I had no idea Serena controlled loan statements tied to her name, but linked to addresses she never lived at. And there in bold letters was a creditor I recognized from Micah's recounting Marcus G. What is this? I murmured, pointing at the name. A loan shark, Grace said flatly. One of the most dangerous in Los Angeles County. Your mother discovered Serena owed him large sums. She paid some of it in secret to protect Serena from harm. But Serena kept digging deeper. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Bills, receipts, late notices, withdrawals, all tied to Serena, all hidden from me. She used our family business accounts, I whispered. She used our inheritance. Yes, Grace confirmed. She drained every resource she could access. And when she ran out, she looked for the next source of money. I understood the implication before Grace even said it. She would have inherited everything if I died. Grace nodded. And even more if your son died with you. I pressed a hand to my stomach, nausea climbing. She wouldn't hurt Micah. Grace's silence answered the question for me. A sound tore out of my chest. Part sorrow, part disbelief, part rage. I'd spent my entire life believing I needed to protect Serena. And all along, my mother had been trying to protect me from Serena. But I never listened. I turned the page. There was a handwritten note from my mother, one I had never seen. It wasn't even dated. My mother's script curved gently across the paper. Lyora, if you ever read this, it means my fears have come true. Serena is capable of harming you not out of hatred, but out of a cold emptiness she does not understand. Protect yourself. Protect your child. Do not ignore the signs as I once did. I couldn't breathe. Micah stirred on the sofa, turning over with a soft sound, and the sight of him grounded me. I wiped my face before he could see the tears. Your mother saw Serena clearly, Grace murmured. She asked me to keep this file safe until you needed it. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice tiny. She hoped you would never need to know, Grace replied gently. She hoped she could fix it before it grew this dangerous. I looked down at the folder again. But she didn't fix it. No, Grace said. Because Serena never wanted to be fixed. She wanted control. That word control broke something loose in my memory. Serena insisting I put the utilities in her name. Serena hovering near me when I signed documents. Serena laughing off my questions about money. Serena telling me, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything," in a way that now felt like a cage disguised as kindness. I pressed a hand to my forehead. My God, I was so blind. You were trusting. Grace corrected. There is a difference. But trusting had cost me everything I owned, and almost my life. I pushed the folder aside and took a shaky breath. There has to be more. Something that explains why she did this now. Grace stood and walked to another cabinet, pulling out a second file, thinner, newer. Your mother wasn't the only one who kept an eye on Serena. I've been watching too. And recently, Serena's behavior escalated. She opened the file to show me printed copies of emails. The first one was from Serena to a real estate attorney. Move forward with transfer. My sister will sign anything I give her. Another email to a financial advisor. Once Leora steps away, I'll have full access. We can implement phase 2. Then a message to someone labeled only as CG. She's too soft to fight. I'll handle her. Just get me the papers. I felt sick reading it, my name tossed around like a problem she needed to eliminate. What is phase 2? I asked. Grace's lips pressed into a thin line. That's what worried me most. Remember when Serena convinced you to let her manage your insurance renewal? That was to help with the paperwork? I said automatically, then froze. Grace shook her head. She increased your accidental death coverage to the maximum allowable amount and put herself as primary beneficiary. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the spiral in my chest. That's not even the worst part, Grace added softly. She also moved assets from the family business into her personal corporation quietly, illegally, without your signature. I rubbed my arms suddenly cold. She forged my name. Yes. But why now? Why push so fast? Grace hesitated. Because Serena's debts were about to be called in. All of them. She had run out of time. And she convinced herself the only way to survive was to erase you. Erase. Not hurt. Not sabotage. Erase. I stood abruptly, unable to sit still. My legs trembled, but I paced anyway because the alternative was collapsing. Micah's voice broke through the silence. Mom. He was awake now, sitting up slowly. His hair tousled his face, pale and drawn. He clutched his backpack with one hand and rubbed his eyes with the other. I went to him immediately. I'm here, baby. He blinked up at me. Are we going to be okay? I smoothed his hair. We will be, I whispered. I promise. He hesitated, then looked past me at Grace. Auntie Serena didn't like her. Grace gave him a small, warm smile. No, she didn't. Why, Micah asked. Grace folded her hands in her lap. Because people who can't control the truth fear the people who can see it. Micah nodded slowly, as if he understood more than a 6-year-old should ever need to. Micah, Grace said gently, Can you tell me everything you heard this morning? Even the small things. He swallowed. Okay. He told her everything. Serena's hurried tone, the man's voice, the map, the strange boxes she carried out of her room at dawn. The way she told him, Later, everything will be easier. You'll see. Grace's expression darkened with each detail. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. Leora, this is bigger than we thought, and more dangerous. I know, I murmured. You need more than safety, Grace continued. You need proof. Tangible, undeniable proof of Serena's intent. My stomach clenched. How do we get that? Grace stood. By going back. A shock ran through me. Back, where? To your house, she said. To what's left of it. No. My response came out fast and panicked. Grace, it's dangerous. Those men could come back. The fire could restart. We can't. We must, she interrupted firmly. The evidence Serena needed to destroy is there, and she may not have succeeded in burning all of it. Micah grabbed my hand. Mom? No. I knelt in front of him. Honey, we wouldn't go alone. Grace nodded. And we wouldn't go through the front. There's a way through the back where no patrol lights reach. My pulse hammered. The idea of returning to that charred skeleton of a house filled me with dread. But without proof, the world would believe Serena's version of events. She'd spin everything into a tragic accident. She'd claim I fled out of shock. She'd twist the evidence. And then she'd try again. I swallowed hard. If we go carefully. We don't stay long. Grace nodded. Exactly. Micah tugged at my sleeve again. But what if Auntie finds us? I cupped his cheek. She won't. Not tonight. He didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Grace closed the folder and locked it back in her drawer. Then she retrieved a flashlight, a set of gloves, and an old ring of keys. We go now, she said. Now, I whispered. Yes. Before Serena realizes you're not in the fire. A cold, heavy truth settled into my bones. Serena believed I was dead. She believed Micah was dead. That belief was the only protection we had. If she discovered otherwise, she wouldn't rest until the job was finished. I lifted Micah into my arms, feeling his small heart pounding against mine. "We'll be okay," I whispered again, more to myself than to him. Grace held open the door. The night outside was cold, darker than before, as if it knew what we were about to face. "Let's go," she said. And with that, we stepped into the shadows to confront the truth my mother had warned me about years ago. The truth that had nearly killed us. The night air bit at my cheeks as we stepped outside, the kind of cold that seemed to creep beneath clothing and settle in the bones. Grace locked the office door behind us, her movements efficient and without hesitation, as if she'd done this sort of thing more times than she could count. Micah clung to my side. His fingers curled into my coat sleeve, silent, but wide-eyed. I could feel the tension in his small body like a live wire. Grace led us toward her old sedan parked under a flickering street lamp. Its faded blue paint reflected the sodium yellow glow in uneven patches. She opened the back door for Micah first. "In you go, sweetheart," she said softly. He climbed in, sliding across the seat with his backpack held tight against his chest. I followed, settling beside him, and Grace got behind the wheel. The engine started with a low rumble vibrating the air inside the car. "For now," she said, turning onto the main road, "we assume Serena has eyes on the obvious places. Hospitals, police stations, anywhere you might seek immediate help." My stomach tightened. How long until she realizes we weren't in that fire? "Hard to say," Grace murmured. "But she's smart, too smart, and she's not patient. The moment she gets restless, she'll start looking for answers." Micah held my hand. "Will she track your phone, Mom?" I checked my pocket. I turned it off earlier. Grace shook her head lightly. "Phones leave footprints even when they're off. Did you bring it with you?" "Yes." "Good." She nodded. "We'll handle that." The way she said it wasn't reassuring. It was simply factual, like she had a plan already forming. Traffic thinned the farther we drove, leaving only scattered headlights cutting through the darkness. I stared out the window at the empty storefronts and quiet houses passing by. Everything felt too normal for what we were about to do. "You sure going back is the only option?" I asked softly. Grace didn't look away from the road. "It's not the only option. It's the necessary option. What if the men come back? Then you stay out of sight and I do the talking." My heart stuttered. "Grace." She cut me off gently. "Your priority is keeping Micah safe. Let me worry about the rest." Her confidence steadied me more than anything else had since the moment the fire started. We reached the outskirts of the neighborhood 20 minutes later. Instead of turning down the main street, Grace veered onto a narrow service road partially hidden by rows of tall hedges. This way, she whispered, as if the darkness itself might be listening. "There's a gap in the old fence behind the property line. Contractors left it years ago." I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to take Micah far away from here, but reason pushed me forward. We had to see what was left. We had to find anything Serena intended to destroy. Grace parked several houses down from ours so far back that the smoldering ruin wasn't even visible yet. She cut the engine and turned to us. "We keep flashlights low. No talking unless necessary. Stay close." I nodded. Micah did too, though fear flickered in his eyes. Grace handed each of us a pair of gloves, then a small flashlight with worn rubber edges. "Stay behind me," she instructed quietly. We slipped out of the car into the cold. Crickets murmured somewhere in the grass, the only sound besides the faint hum of distant traffic. Grace moved ahead, her flashlight beam sweeping just enough to keep us from stumbling. My breath clouded the air as we approached the thick hedge lining the back of our old neighborhood. Grace crouched beside a section that looked nearly indistinguishable from the rest. But when she pushed the leaves aside, a narrow opening revealed itself, a dark tunnel through tangled branches and brambles. "This is the path," she said softly. Micah squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. We stepped through the hedge, the branches scraping lightly against our coats. The other side opened to a strip of undeveloped land, dry, uneven dirt stretching behind the rows of houses. The smell of lingering smoke drifted faintly through the air, and with it memories of the fire clawed at my mind. Grace began walking toward our property. The house will be visible once we crest the slope. The slope was only a gentle rise, but as I climbed it, my chest tightened. When we reached the top, the remains of our home came into view, or rather, what was left of it. Blackened beams jutted up like broken ribs. Windows were nothing but hollow, jagged holes. Sections of the roof had caved in completely. Ash coated the ground like gray snow. Smoke still curled upward in thin, ghostly threads. Micah sucked in a small, sharp breath. "Mom." I know I whispered. Seeing it from a distance earlier was one thing. Standing before the carcass of the place I had built with love of the rooms where Micah took his first steps, where we laughed and argued and lived, felt like being gutted. Grace steadied her flashlight beam and scanned the perimeter. "We go in from the back, less visibility." I followed her, careful to step where she stepped. The air grew warmer the closer we got, pockets of heat still seeping from the debris. Our shoes crunched on charred fragments of wood and glass. Grace paused at the back door, what remained of it. Its metal frame leaned sideways, warped from the heat, but the latch area was still intact enough to see clear tool marks. "Not forced," she murmured. "They had keys." I felt Micah press against my side. Inside the house was unrecognizable. The kitchen where I'd cooked Micah's breakfasts was a hollow grid of scorched metal and collapsed cabinets. The living room was a cavern of ash. The staircase was barely standing, its steps cracked and blackened. "Is it safe?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "As long as we don't linger or climb anything unstable," Grace said. "Stay on the solid beams. Follow the pattern of the firefighters' footprints." She moved with surprising confidence for someone in her 60s. Her flashlight caught glints of glass and charred fragments in the air. She maneuvered around what used to be a door frame, then pointed upward. "That's the hallway to the bedrooms," she whispered. "The office should be intact enough for us to see if anything survived. The office, where Serena kept documents, where she hid things, where she forged my name, where she planned my life like a chessboard she could rearrange without consequence." A mixture of fear and anger simmered beneath my ribs. We stepped carefully into the hallway. Most of the upper structure had collapsed, but parts of the office area had only partially burned. The air grew thicker, tinged with something sharp, melted plastic, burnt wiring. Grace raised her flashlight. "Here." The office door hung crooked. The top hinge melted into a drooping shard of metal. Grace pushed gently, and it scraped open with a low groan. The room was a wreck. Papers, scorched drawers, warped shelves reduced to twisted silhouettes. But the wall safe was still there, partially exposed, its metal casing blackened but intact. I stared at it, heart thudding. "Do you think anything survived inside safes are built for heat protection?" Grace said. "If the fire didn't reach too high a temperature, the contents may be recoverable." She knelt, brushing aside ash, and turned the dial. "What's the combination?" I told her. She entered the numbers slowly, then pulled the handle. It resisted for a moment, then clicked open with a reluctant groan. Micah stood behind me, holding his breath. Inside was a charred mess of melted plastic, warped folders, and singed envelopes. But beneath the top layer of destruction, I spotted a corner of something metallic, a small flash drive half covered in ash, but visibly intact. Grace reached in carefully and lifted it out. This might contain financial data, or communications. My pulse quickened. Or evidence. "Yes," she said quietly. "Or evidence." She placed it gently into her coat pocket. Then Micah tugged my sleeve. "Mom, look." He pointed to a section of the floor where the wood had burned unevenly, leaving a narrow opening near the wall. Something shiny glinted within the gap. I crouched and pulled aside debris. Beneath could have been mistaken for a mere scrap, except it wasn't. It was a small fireproof envelope, edges blackened but body intact. Grace raised an eyebrow. Fireproof documents. Serena didn't store these in the safe. That alone is suspicious. Hands shaking, I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: a notarized transfer document for my car with Serena's forged signature on my line, a deed for our house transferred to Serena for administrative purposes, and a life insurance policy naming Serena as the sole beneficiary, filed just 2 months ago. My breath left my body in a violent exhale. That, I whispered, voice breaking. That's the motive. Grace nodded grimly. This is more than enough to prove premeditation. Micah wrapped his arms around my waist. So, Auntie Serena really did want us gone. I held him close. She did, baby, but she failed. Before I could say more, Grace stiffened suddenly. Quiet. I froze. A faint crunch echoed from downstairs. Footsteps. My blood turned to ice. Micah's fingers dug into my coat. Grace leaned toward us, whispering so quietly it barely carried through the air. We're not alone. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Another step. Heavier this time. Then a man's voice, low, gruff, unmistakably the same one Micah had described from the kitchen earlier that morning. Boss said check upstairs. Said she might have left something. Boss? Serena. A second voice answered. Fire's dying down. Should be quick. Grace's eyes widened. We have to move. Now. She motioned us toward the back of the room. The office window was shattered, but accessible. I whispered, the glass. We'll be careful, Grace replied. The footsteps grew louder, turning toward the hallway. I picked up Micah, feeling his small arms wrap around my neck. Grace pushed debris aside and stepped onto the ledge. Come, she urged. The footsteps stopped just outside the office door. My heart slammed into my ribs. Grace climbed out first. I passed Micah to her, then swung my leg over the frame and dropped down into the cold night air just as the office door creaked open behind us. Someone was here, the first man said. Safe's open. Check outside, the second replied. Grace grabbed my arm. Run. We bolted into the darkness, moving along the back property line as fast and silently as we could. Micah clung to her, staring back over her shoulder with wide, terrified eyes. Behind us, flashlights flickered through the broken window. Tracks, one of the men snarled. Fresh. Grace urged us faster, guiding us toward the hedge. The men's footsteps grew louder. Closer. Go, Grace whispered sharply. We dove into the hedge just as flashlights swept across the space where we had stood seconds before. Branches clawed at my arms as we crawled through my lungs, burning with fear. Micah whimpered, and I whispered urgently, It's okay, keep going, almost there. When we emerged on the far side, Grace didn't stop. She sprinted toward the car keys already in hand. We piled inside. The engine roared to life. And as Grace sped away from the burning skeleton of my home, one truth struck me with full force. Serena hadn't failed because of luck. She'd failed because Micah had been brave, and because for the first time in my life, I had finally listened. Grace didn't ease off the gas until we were several miles away from the neighborhood, and even then she kept glancing in the rearview mirror as if expecting the dark SUVs to reappear at any moment. My breath trembled in my chest, each inhale sharp and uneven. Micah was beside me in the back seat, one hand gripping mine, and the other clutching his dinosaur backpack like it held his entire world inside. The evidence hidden in Grace's coat pocket felt like a burning coal between us, dangerous, volatile, needed. Only after turning onto a long stretch of industrial road lined with warehouses did Grace finally slow the car. The engine hummed as she pulled into a nearly empty lot tucked between 2 shuttered factories. She switched off the headlights but kept the engine running, her eyes scanning the quiet surroundings. "We can't go back to my office," she said, voice steady but low. "If Serena put anyone on you, that's the first place they'll check." I swallowed hard. Then where do we go? Somewhere Serena doesn't know. Somewhere that won't be tied to you or your mother. A place she'd never think to look. Micah pressed closer to me. Mom, I'm scared. I know, baby. I wrapped an arm around him, pulling him against my side. But we're safe right now. Grace won't let anything happen. She's right, Grace said gently. I won't. The weight of everything we'd seen at the house still clung to me like soot. Serena's forged documents, the fireproof envelope, the men searching upstairs, the narrow escape. My hands still shook from adrenaline. How long do we have before they realize someone else was there? I asked. Not long, Grace replied. They already know the safe was opened. When they report that to Serena, she'll understand the fire failed. And then she'll come after us again, I whispered. Yes. Micah shivered. I tucked my coat around him, but the cold settling into his little bones wasn't from the night air. It was from what he'd witnessed. What we'd both witnessed. Grace took a breath, her gaze firm. Before we do anything else, we need to separate from anything Serena could track. My heart stumbled. What do you mean phones? Cards? Anything electronic? If your phone pings a tower, if your debit card registers a purchase, if you log into a single account, Serena will find you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the familiar case suddenly feeling like a trap. Grace extended her hand. I'll dispose of it safely, but right now it needs to go. Micah held up his small tablet slowly. Mine too. Grace nodded. For now, sweetheart. He hesitated before placing it in her palm. His fingers lingered on it longer than mine did. It held his games, his pictures, his tiny pieces of normal life. But he let go. Grace set the devices on the dashboard. We'll destroy them once we're sure we're not being followed. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. It hit me then we were truly completely cut off. No way to call for help. No way to be found. It was just us and Serena hunting from the shadows. Where are we going? I asked again, my voice barely carrying. Grace put the car back into gear. A safe house. A what? A small apartment downtown, she explained. I keep it for clients fleeing domestic violence or unsafe situations. No one knows it's connected to me. Not even Serena. Hope flickered faintly inside me. Is it secure? Yes. And more importantly, it's invisible. As we drove, the cityscape changed gradually. Warehouse roofs replaced by old brick buildings, neon signs flickering above empty streets, quiet alleyways stretching beyond pools of yellow lamplight. Grace maneuvered through the maze-like streets with practiced ease. Micah mumbled a question from beside me. Are we going to stay there forever? No, I said, immediately stroking his hair. Just until we figure out our next steps. But where will we live? He whispered. I didn't have an answer. My home was ash. My sister held my financial identity hostage. My accounts were compromised. Everything in my life had been built beneath Serena's shadow, and now that shadow had become a hand trying to strangle us. I don't know yet, baby, I admitted. But we'll rebuild, piece by piece. He nodded, trusting me more than I deserved. That trust terrified me. We turned into an alley behind a row of aging apartments. A single flickering bulb illuminated the narrow passage. A rusted metal staircase rose along the brick wall leading to the second floor. Grace parked near the dumpster and cut the engine completely this time. We're here, she said. I scanned the area nervously. A cat darted from behind a trash can. A bus rumbled faintly several streets away. No sign of SUVs. No heavy footsteps. Grace grabbed a small duffel bag from the trunk, then motioned us forward. Stay close. The metal staircase groaned under our weight as we climbed. At the top, Grace inserted a key into a dented door with chipped white paint. The lock clicked and she pushed the door open. The apartment was small-tiny really, but clean. A single couch against one wall. A kitchenette. A narrow hallway leading to a bedroom barely bigger than a closet. A bathroom that looked recently scrubbed. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. Grace set down the duffel. There's food in the cabinets, clothes in the drawers, supplies for a few days. Micah stepped in cautiously, looking around with wide eyes. Is this ours? For now, I said softly. It's safe. He walked over to the small window, peering through a crack in the blinds. No one can see us. No one, Grace said. He nodded and finally relaxed enough to sit on the couch, his legs curled beneath him. Before long, he was asleep, just tipped over quietly, like a candle being snuffed out. Only then did I let myself inhale deeply. Grace motioned for me to sit at the tiny kitchen table. She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs and took a seat across from me. You're still in shock, she observed. Maybe I was. My mind felt foggy, but my heartbeat raced. The images kept replaying fire eating through my home, men in dark clothes stepping through the doorway with keys. Serena's smile at the airport, the forged documents, the flames licking up the walls. My sister tried to kill me. I murmured the words strange and heavy in my mouth. She tried to kill my son. Grace didn't flinch, and she failed. But she won't stop. No, Grace agreed. She won't. I rubbed my eyes. What do I do now? I can't go to the police, not without proof, and even with what we found. Serena's connections. Connections don't protect against everything, Grace said. But you're right. Going to the police now without a controlled approach could backfire. Serena would spin the narrative faster than you could explain it. So we wait. No, we plan. Her voice held a steely edge that made me straighten. What kind of plan? One that turns Serena's biggest strength against her, Grace said. Her confidence, her certainty that she is always 10 steps ahead, her belief that you are fragile, oblivious, easy to manipulate. I clenched my fists. I'm not that person anymore. No, Grace said softly. You aren't. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the flash drive and the fireproof documents we'd found. These are the first tools we will use. But there may be more. Someone as arrogant as Serena leaves traces, conversations, payments deals. People willing to talk. People she's wronged. A spark of something, maybe courage, flared in my chest. And we'll find them. Yes. Silence stretched between us for a moment, heavy but purposeful. Then Grace said, For tonight you and Micah rest. Tomorrow we start gathering everything we need. I nodded, though exhaustion was already pressing down on me like a weight. But before she could stand, something inside me shifted. A memory surfaced, small, insignificant, but suddenly meaningful. Grace, I whispered. Earlier, at the house. When those men came upstairs, they said something. She paused. What did they say? They said Boss said she might have left something. She, not he, not they. She. Grace leaned back in her chair. They meant Serena. I know, but it means something else too. Yes, Grace murmured. It means Serena didn't act alone in planning. She oversaw it, and she's checking the aftermath. Which means Grace finished quietly. She already has doubts. A cold shiver went down my spine. She might already suspect we're alive, I whispered. Yes, Grace said. Which means she will come looking much sooner than we hoped. I looked toward the couch where Micah slept, curled into himself, unaware of the storm still swirling around him. My breath trembled. Then we need to move fast, I whispered. Grace nodded. We will. She stood and walked toward the door. I'll be back in the morning. Don't open for anyone but me. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. And Leora, brace yourself. The truth we uncover won't be gentle. After she left, the apartment was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and Micah's quiet breathing. I sat on the edge of the couch, watching my son sleep, his face soft and peaceful despite everything. He saved us, and now I would save him. I lay down beside him, pulling the thin blanket up over both of us. My eyes burned from exhaustion. My mind buzzed with fear. But somewhere beneath the fear, determination pulsed steady, rising. We weren't done, and neither was Serena. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally claimed me, one truth settled deep into my bones. The next time Serena came for us, I would be ready. I woke to the faint sound of footsteps overhead, or at least I thought I did. For the first few seconds, my body shifted instinctively, bracing for danger, until I remembered I wasn't in my burned house or Grace's office. I was on the couch in the safe house with Micah curled tightly against me. His breath warmed my arm, the rise and fall of his chest slow and steady. Dawn barely touched the blinds, turning the cramped room into a faded wash of pale blue. I lay still for a moment listening. Silence settled around us, broken only by the occasional distant hiss of a bus or the low hum of early morning traffic. No footsteps. No voices. No heavy boots approaching the door. We had survived the night. My bones ached from sleeping on the couch, but I didn't dare move until Micah stirred on his own. Eventually he shifted his small fingers, brushing my hand. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm here," I murmured. He blinked sleepily, then sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his fist. "Did she find us?" "No, sweetheart." His shoulders relaxed visibly. He leaned against me for a few seconds longer, as if needing physical proof we were still safe. I smoothed his hair. "Do you want breakfast?" He nodded. I didn't expect much from the safe house kitchen, but when I flicked on the light, I found oatmeal packets, canned fruit crackers, and a half-full box of cereal with a folded note inside in Grace's handwriting. "Eat. Think. Don't decide anything until I arrive." A wave of gratitude washed through me. Grace wasn't just helping us. She was preparing for war in her own way. Micah and I ate quietly at the small table. He kept glancing at the door between bites, and I couldn't blame him. Every sound from the hallway made my pulse jump. The world felt fragile, like one wrong move might shatter our thin layer of safety. When he finished eating, he leaned his chin on his hand. "Mom, do you think Auntie Serena ever loved us?" The question hit hard. Harder than the fire. Harder than the forged documents. Harder than seeing my home turn to ash. I reached across the table and took his hand. "I think Serena loves herself more than she can love anyone else," I said carefully. "Sometimes people confuse control with love. That's what she did." His brow furrowed. "So she didn't love me?" "She loved the idea of being important to you," I said softly. "But love the real kind means wanting someone safe. And Serena didn't want us safe." He nodded slowly, then almost in a whisper, "But I loved her." My throat tightened. "You can love someone and still protect yourself from them," I whispered. "Love doesn't mean you let them hurt you." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded again. I could see something shifting behind his eyes, loss mingled with understanding far beyond his years. My little boy was growing up in ways no child should ever have to. Before I could say more, a soft knock sounded at the door. Micah stiffened. I nearly knocked the chair over, standing up. "Who is it I called?" "Grace." Her voice. Steady, calm, unmistakable. I checked the peephole anyway. It was her. Relief washed through me. I unbolted the door. Grace stepped inside with a gust of cool morning air. She wore the same coat as last night, but her hair was freshly tied back, and a travel mug of coffee steamed in her hand. "Good. You're awake," she said. "We have work to do." I locked the door behind her. "Did something happen?" "Not yet," she said. "Which means we still have the advantage." She set her bag on the table and pulled out a laptop, a sealed evidence pouch, and a few printed documents. Micah watched her intently from the couch, his legs tucked under him. Grace gave him a small smile. "Morning, Micah." "Hi," he whispered. She opened the laptop. We need to analyze the flash drive from the safe. It may hold communication logs, financial trails, or planning details Serena didn't want found. My stomach tightened. And the documents we recovered, Grace slid the evidence pouch toward me. Inside, the forged deeds, insurance papers, and transfer forms seemed even more damning in the daylight. These, she said, prove motive and preparation. But the flash drive may give us timelines, accomplices, or payment logs. Micah shifted. What's accomplices? People helping Auntie, I said softly. His eyes widened. The men from last night. Yes, Grace said. And maybe others. She inserted the flash drive into the laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder labeled simply Private. Grace clicked it open. My breath caught. There were subfolders with dates, months of them, each labeled with phrases that made my stomach twist. Phase 2, Prep Transition Strategy, Exit Plan, LH. Micah. Aftermath, Projections. Micah leaned closer. Why is my name there? I gently guided him back. It's okay, I murmured, though nothing about it felt okay. Grace's face became stone. She documented everything. She clicked the first folder. A list of PDF scans, receipts, bank transfers, emails filled the screen. Grace opened one at random. It was an email from Serena to someone labeled only as CG. Once she signs the final power of attorney packet, everything will shift overnight. She never reads the fine print. She trusts me completely. I felt bile rise in my throat. I didn't sign any power of attorney, I whispered. No, Grace said, but she intended you to. She opened another file. This time an invoice $25,000 paid to Marcus G., dated 3 days before the fire. Then another. A typed outline titled Contingency Protocol if Accident Occurs Before Timeline Completion. What is this? I choked out. Grace read silently, her jaw tightening. Insurance filings, recovery steps, real estate liquidation, post-mortem steps, she said. Serena planned what to do after your death. Micah's face crumpled. She didn't think about me at all. Grace gave him a steady look. That is because she underestimated you, Micah. And she was wrong. He blinked hard and nodded. She opened the folder titled LH, my initials. Files filled the screen, notes on my behavior, financial patterns, work, history, weaknesses. Weaknesses. She studied you, Grace murmured. She studied me like prey, I whispered. My hands shook violently. She wrote down everything, every detail. She's meticulous, Grace said, carefully calculating. That is both her strength and her downfall. How can it be her downfall, I asked. Because she leaves records, Grace said. Records we now have. Micah tugged my shirt sleeve gently. Mom, look. He pointed to a file near the bottom, one labeled End Date Confirmed. Grace clicked it. The document was short. Fire confirmed as method. Access points secured. Travel alibi established. Timeline irreversible after ignition. My head spun. Micah burrowed into my side, trembling. She picked fire on purpose. I wrapped my arms around him tightly. Yes, baby. But we got out. Grace looked at me, her eyes sharp with purpose. We have enough to bring her down, but we must choose the right approach. What do you mean? If we rush to police now, Serena will spin this claim. The documents were forged by you. Claim the drive is planted. Argue you're mentally unstable after trauma. She's prepared for that. Her power lies in manipulating perception. And ours, I asked. Ours lies in presenting undeniable truth, Grace said. We need a law enforcement ally who cannot be bought, someone who can authenticate this evidence independently. My stomach tightened. Do you know anyone? She nodded slowly. Detective Harlow. Internal Affairs. He investigated a corruption scandal 5 years ago and nearly lost his career for exposing it. He can help, but only if we approach him discreetly. I wasn't sure if I felt relief or fear. Maybe both. Micah crawled into my lap, curling into himself. I held him, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. His trust felt like both a blessing and a weight. Grace stood. "We have a small window," she said. "Before Serena realizes the documents didn't burn, before she suspects you escaped, before Marcus and the others report back fully." I swallowed. "How much time?" hours, Grace said. "Not days." I ran a hand through my hair. "So what do we do first?" Grace pointed to the laptop screen. "We extract everything, back it up twice. Once on a secure drive, I'll keep once on a decoy Serena will eventually find." "A decoy," I echoed. "Yes," Grace said. "We will let her think she has the upper hand, and when she tries to use it, we'll bring her down." My chest expanded with something unfamiliar, something fierce. "Resolve." "We do it," I whispered. Grace nodded once. "Good." The next hour passed in a blur of copying files, duplicating folders, organizing evidence. Micah stayed beside me the entire time, handing me envelopes, labeling documents in his careful handwriting, his little presence reminding me why we had to survive this. But something gnawed at me, a fear I couldn't name. When Grace finished securing the final backup, she closed her laptop and looked at me seriously. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said. "Serena didn't come up with this plan alone." My blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "Someone guided her. Someone with resources beyond hers. Someone who knew how to structure fraud, manipulate insurance cover tracks." "Who?" I whispered. "I don't know yet," Grace admitted. "But Serena hides her weaknesses. She would never hire amateurs." A knock sounded at the door. Soft, measured. The exact pattern Grace used. Except she was sitting right in front of me. Her eyes widened. Micah froze. My breath lodged in my throat. The knock came again, 3 slow taps. Grace stood silently and mouthed the words, "Don't move, don't breathe, don't speak." My heartbeat thundered so loudly I thought whoever was outside would hear it. The knock came a 3rd time. Then a familiar voice drifted through the door, a voice that made my entire body ice over. "Lyora, open the door." Serena. She had found us. For a moment I thought I had imagined it, that my sister's voice, calm, honey-coated, unmistakable, was just another cruel echo of the fear that had followed me through the night. But then it came again, smooth as silk and twice as cold. "Lyora, I know you're in there. Open the door. We need to talk." Micah whimpered so quietly it nearly broke me. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close, my heartbeat a violent drum beneath my skin. Grace's face became a mask of deadly stillness. She moved silently to the light switch and flicked it off, plunging the safe house into shadows. Only the faintest cracks of daylight managed to slip through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor. Another knock, firmer this time. Sweetheart Serena called almost playfully, "I don't have time for games. Open up!" I pressed a shaking finger to my lips, urging Micah to stay silent. He buried his face in my shirt, tiny fists clutching the fabric. Grace stepped toward the door slowly, her steps soundless. She motioned for me to slide back against the far wall, and I obeyed, my legs trembling as I crouched behind the couch with Micah in my arms. The safe house felt suddenly too small, too exposed, too vulnerable. Grace approached the peephole but didn't look through it directly. Instead, she angled herself to the side, lifting a compact mirror from her pocket. With careful precision, she held it up to catch the reflection through the peephole. Her jaw clenched. She mouthed one word: "Alone." Relief flickered in my chest but vanished as quickly as it came. With Serena, being alone didn't mean harmless. It meant dangerous in a different way. Another knock, not loud but sharp and impatient. Lyora, Serena said, her voice lowering with irritation. "I know you didn't die in that fire, So stop pretending. My lungs tightened. Micah looked up at me, his eyes wide. How does she know? I shook my head, unable to answer. Maybe the men found our footprints. Maybe Serena never trusted them fully. Maybe she sensed the flaw the way predators sense wounded prey. Grace stepped back from the door and mouthed, "Stay here, don't move." Then she spoke, her voice calm and clear. "Serena Hale, you are trespassing on private property." There was a brief silence. Then Serena laughed. "Oh my God," she said, amusement dripping from every syllable. "Is that you, Grace Armitage, you meddlesome old woman? Of course Leora would run to you. She always needed someone to think for her." Grace didn't respond. Serena continued. "Let me in. I just want to see my sister." Grace spoke again, colder than I'd ever heard her. "Your sister does not want to see you." Serena sighed dramatically. "Leora. Dear, are you letting her speak for you now? Come on, just open the door. We can work this out." Micah shuddered in my arms. I held him tighter, my nails digging into my own palm. Serena's next words cut through the silence like a blade. "Open the door, or I'll make sure what comes next is far worse than a fire." Grace's eyes flicked to me. Not a threat, a promise. She raised her voice slightly. "Leave. Now. The police are on their way." Serena's tone changed instantly, dropping the sweetness. "You won't call them. Not without evidence. And you don't have it. Not enough to win." Her voice came closer to the door as if she were leaning against it. "But I do have something, Grace darling. I have people. I have information. And I have nothing left to lose. So unless you want to see how far I'll go open the door." Micah began to cry silently, tears wetting my shirt. I stroked his back in slow circles. Grace remained unmoved. "You don't have the leverage you think you do, Serena." "Oh, I have plenty," Serena purred, starting with a little visit I paid earlier this morning. My stomach dropped. No, she couldn't have Grace's voice sharpened. "What did you do?" "I visited a friend," Serena said. "Your mailman. Lovely man, very chatty. He told me exactly where to find a certain vacant apartment rented under your alias." Grace's jaw tensed. She whispered to me, barely audible, "We need to move. She knows too much." I swallowed a sob. Serena rapped her knuckles lightly against the door. "Leora, sweetheart. I can hear you breathing in there. We don't have to be enemies. Just open up. Let's talk like family." Talk like family? I almost laughed. Maybe I would have if terror hadn't choked off the sound. The scraping of metal broke through the silence. I froze. Grace lunged toward the door, bracing her shoulder against it. "She's picking the lock," she hissed. My heart stuttered violently. Serena's voice came sweeter now, humming softly as the pick clicked. "Coalition-grade lock," she said. "You always liked overkill, Grace." Grace braced harder, her muscles taut. Micah whispered, "Mom, she's coming." "Yes." And too quickly. Grace turned back to me, urgency burning in her eyes. "Get him to the bedroom. Barricade the door." "What about you?" I whispered harshly. "I'll buy you time." "No." "Yes," she said firmly. "Go. Now." I scooped Micah up and rushed toward the back hallway, his arms wrapped around my neck, trembling. Behind us, the lock clicked again, then another. Serena murmured in satisfaction. "Almost there." I shoved the bedroom door open, pulled Micah inside and closed it softly. The room was tiny, just a cot, a chair, and a dresser. I pushed the dresser against the door, my breath catching from fear and the effort. Micah clung to me. "Mom, I'm here," I whispered. "Stay behind the bed. Don't move unless I tell you." He obeyed instantly, crouching behind the cot, eyes wide and frightened. From the front of the apartment, Serena's voice floated in. "Got it!" The lock gave a final, decisive click. Grace shouted, Stay back! The door burst open. Micah gasped. Nightmare footsteps, light but purposeful, entered the safe house. Serena's heels tapped across the floor as she stepped inside. I pictured her perfectly immaculate hair, expensive coat ice in her veins. A woman who looked like she belonged at a board meeting, not orchestrating arson. "Oh, Grace," Serena crooned. "You look tense." "Is something wrong?" Grace didn't answer. I heard a shuffle, a thud, a gasp. Micah whimpered. I pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't move," I mouthed. Serena's voice sharpened. "Where is she?" Grace exhaled sharply through pain. "She's gone." "Liar." Footsteps approached the hallway. I pulled Micah closer behind the cot, shielding him. Serena's silhouette appeared under the crack of the bedroom door, shadows shifting as she moved nearer. I held my breath. Serena pushed lightly at the door. It didn't budge. A pause. Then she laughed quietly. "Lyora, sweetheart, you can't hide forever." My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst through my ribs. Micah clutched my hand with both of his small fingers digging into my palm. Serena pushed again, harder this time. The dresser scraped an inch. Grace's voice suddenly rang out, strained but loud. "Serena, stop this before you destroy whatever piece of your soul is left." "My soul," Serena scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Souls are for people who don't win." She shoved again. The dresser moved. I held Micah and closed my eyes for a split second, a prayer, a wish, a plea. A loud pounding came from the front door. Serena froze. Another pound. Then another. "Open up!" a commanding voice shouted. "Building management." Micah's eyes widened. Grace whispered sharply, "Don't move, don't speak." Serena hissed a curse, low and venomous. Keys jangled outside the door. Real keys. Not picks. Serena backed away from the bedroom. "This isn't over," she snarled softly. "Not even close." The front door lock twisted. Serena bolted to the window. Grace stumbled after her. "Don't!" "Serena, stop!" Serena slid the window open, the rusty metal screeching. She climbed onto the fire escape with infuriating ease, her silhouette framed by pale morning light. She looked back at the dark apartment, her eyes glinting with something like pleasure. Then she vanished down the fire escape ladder. The front door burst open. 2 maintenance men stepped inside with confused expressions, looking around the apartment. Grace leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her ribs. I rushed out of the bedroom with Micah in my arms. "Grace," I cried. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she managed, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. One of the maintenance men frowned. "Everything okay here?" "We got complaints of a break-in." Grace straightened, smoothing her hair. "Just a misunderstanding. We're fine. We should call the police," the other offered. "Don't." Grace snapped a little too quickly, then softened her tone. "We have it handled." The men exchanged uneasy glances but nodded and backed out slowly, leaving the door open behind them. When they were gone, Grace eased into a chair, wincing. Micah clung to me, shaking. "She found us, Mom. She found us." I cupped his face. "We're okay. She's gone." "For now," Grace said quietly. "But she will come again. And next time she won't come alone." Fear clawed at my throat. Micah looked between us. "What do we do?" Grace lifted her gaze, hardened by certainty. "We stop running," she whispered. "We go on the offensive." I stared at her, the fear inside me slowly transforming into something sharper, something that felt almost like fire. "Then tell me what we need to do," I said, "because I'm done hiding." Grace nodded once. "Good," she said. "Then we begin today." We didn't leave the safe house for hours after Serena escaped down the fire escape. Even after the maintenance men departed and the hallway fell silent again, the air felt charged with danger, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Grace sat at the kitchen table with a heating pad pressed to her ribs, her jaw tight each time she shifted. I hovered close, torn between wanting to help her and needing to keep Micah anchored because he wouldn't let go of my hand for more than a second. "Mom," he whispered. "Are we going to run again?" I shook my head and wrapped an arm around him. "Not this time. Running only keeps us scared. We need to end this." Grace looked up at me, her expression hardening with agreement. "Your sister has crossed every line. We have the evidence, but we need to deliver it the right way." I swallowed. "You mean Detective Harlow?" "Yes." Grace exhaled sharply and reached for her laptop. "He's the one person who won't be intimidated by Serena's money connections or theatrics. But contacting him has to be done very carefully." Why, I asked. "Because Serena likely has access to monitoring tools," Grace said. "Phone tracing, online tracking, maybe even informants. If we contact Harlow in the open, she could intercept it." I tensed. Every part of my sister seemed designed to suffocate us. "So how do we reach him?" I asked. A slow, knowing smile curved across Grace's lips. Face to face. Micah pressed closer to me. "But what if Auntie Serena is watching outside? What if she finds us again?" Grace turned to him with gentle seriousness. "Micah, your aunt makes people underestimate her by acting in the open. But she herself underestimates how quickly we can move, and we're going to use that." "But what if I interrupted softly? We'll be careful, and we'll be together." He nodded, but I could see he was scared. I was too. Fear hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear, but beneath it something else burned, a rising determination that Serena wouldn't win. Not this time. Not with the truth in our hands. Grace gingerly stood and crossed the room. "We'll need disguises. Minimal, but enough to keep Serena from recognizing you instantly." She opened a closet and pulled out some clothing, dark hoodies, baseball caps, sunglasses, a loose coat for me. Items that made us ordinary, invisible. Micah watched carefully. "Do I have a disguise too?" Grace nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Just a hat and a mask, enough to make you blend in." He seemed proud of that. He sat straighter. I helped him put on the cap. My hands shook slightly, but I hid it. He didn't need to feel my fear. When we were ready, Grace turned off all the lights and cracked the blinds a fraction. Early afternoon sunlight fell in thin strips across her face. "No one outside," she murmured. "But we don't leave from the front. We'll take the back stairwell." Micah slipped his small hand into mine. "Mom, what if Auntie Serena is waiting somewhere else?" I knelt to meet his eyes. "Then she won't find us because we're smarter than she thinks, and because we're not alone." He squeezed my hand. Grace grabbed the duffel bag with the flash drive and documents. "Let's move." The hallway beyond the safe house was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic breaking the stillness. We descended the back stairwell, each step deliberate and silent. At the back door, Grace paused and listened before opening it a fraction. Sunlight and the smell of asphalt drifted in. "No one's here," she whispered. We slipped into the alley. I kept Micah close to my hip. Every shadow looked suspicious, every passing car too slow. Grace walked briskly, scanning left and right. She led us toward the busier street at the end of the alley where noise and movement would swallow us up. "It's harder to track people in crowds," Grace explained. "That's our advantage." Micah nodded intently as though taking mental notes. We boarded a bus heading toward downtown. I kept my head low, my sunglasses hiding the exhaustion in my eyes. Micah sat between us, his hand never leaving mine. Grace sat at the outer aisle seat, vigilant. The city blurred past street vendors, teenagers walking in groups, office workers with coffee cups. Life carried on around us with indifferent momentum, but I felt disconnected from it all, wrapped in a bubble of urgency and fear. Grace leaned closer. "Harlow's unofficial office is in a building near the plaza. Off the books unmarked. It's where he meets informants. If anyone can help us, it's him. I nodded, though my stomach twisted. What if he didn't believe us? What if Serena got to him first? As if reading my mind, Grace added. He knows your mother, and he always believed she died knowing something was wrong with Serena. He'll listen. That gave me more comfort than anything had in days. 20 minutes later, we got off near the plaza, a busy area with food trucks, art vendors, and families walking through the square. I felt eyes on me, real or imagined, but Grace guided us confidently through the crowd until we reached an inconspicuous office building with tinted windows. No signs, she said. That's how you know it's the right place. We entered through a side door and climbed 2 flights of stairs. Grace knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door opened. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and deep-set eyes studied us. His expression didn't change, but I sensed he recognized Grace instantly. Armitage, he said. You don't call, you don't write, you don't send holiday cards. You only show up when hell has broken loose. Grace smiled tightly. Harlow, this is one of those times. He stepped aside. Then get in, quickly. Inside the office was Spartan metal filing cabinets, mismatched chairs, a single desk. A coffee maker hissed quietly in the corner. Harlow shut the door behind us and locked it with 3 different mechanisms before turning again. His gaze landed on me. You must be Leora. I nodded. And you're Micah, I assume. Micah stepped half behind me, shy and cautious. It's okay, I whispered. He's here to help. Micah nodded but didn't move from my side. Harlow gestured for us to sit. Grace only brings me situations where the danger is already in motion. So start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. I wasn't sure I could relive it all, but I forced myself to speak. Everything poured out: the airport, Micah's warning, the fire, the men breaking in, the forged documents, the flash drive, Serena at the safe house, everything. My throat ached halfway through, but I continued because this was the only chance we had. When I finished, silence filled the room. Harlow steepled his fingers thoughtfully. Then he said, Your sister is dangerous. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But more importantly, he continued, She's sloppy in the way arrogant people become sloppy. She leaves too much behind. Too much traceable. Grace placed the flash drive and documents on his desk. We need authentication, chain of custody logs, official forensic validation. Harlow nodded. I can do that. But understand this, once I start the process, Serena will know someone is coming for her. My pulse quickened. How soon? Maybe hours, he said. Maybe minutes. Micah pressed himself against my side. She'll come after us. She'll try, Harlow said. But she won't succeed. I swallowed. What do we do while you work on the evidence? You stay hidden, he said. I'll assign 2 plainclothes officers to watch the safe house. No, Grace said firmly. She already found 1 safe house. Harlow frowned. How? Through a mailman, Grace muttered. Serena knows far too much. Harlow leaned back. Then you need a new location. One only I know. One she can't trace. I looked at him, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. You have somewhere? Yes, he said. An old safe apartment used for witness protection before the new system was implemented. It's off-grid. No electronic signature. No paper trail. If Serena tries to hunt you, she'll hit dead ends. Micah's shoulders relaxed just a little. When do we go? I asked. Now, Harlow said. Because if your sister has already confirmed the fire didn't kill you, she'll escalate. He stood, sliding the evidence into a locked briefcase. But one more thing, and you need to prepare yourselves. Grace narrowed her eyes. What Serena didn't do this alone, Harlow said. Someone guided her steps. Someone coached her through insurance fraud, asset theft, and arson. Someone who stands to gain if she succeeds. I felt my heartbeat stutter. Grace asked the question for me. Who? Harlow shook his head. I don't know yet, but I will. Micah's voice trembled. Is that person worse than Auntie Serena? Harlow inhaled slowly. Yes. Because while Serena is impulsive, this other person is calculating, patient, and far more dangerous. My skin crawled. Harlow grabbed his coat. We move now, and we don't stop until Serena is in handcuffs and the mastermind behind her is exposed. I stood lifting Micah into my arms. Grace grabbed the duffel bag. Harlow opened the door and scanned the hallway. Clear. He motioned us forward. Stay close. Things will move quickly from here. I followed him out, my heart thudding my legs, shaky but determined. Micah whispered into my shoulder. Mom, are we going to win? I looked down at him, brushing a tear from his cheek. Yes, I said softly. We are. Because we're fighting back now. And as we stepped out into the unpredictable city once more, I finally felt it. Not safety, not yet, but something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Harlow didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive. His eyes stayed on the road, scanning every car we passed, every vehicle that lingered too long in a lane, every shadow that seemed out of place. The silence wasn't comforting. It was sharp electric, a sign that danger wasn't behind us anymore. It was beside us, around us, coming for us with every mile we put between ourselves and the safe house Serena had already breached. Micah was on my lap in the back seat, his small body curled against me, but I could feel the tension in his muscles. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening. Watching the world with the same quiet vigilance that had saved our lives more than once. Grace sat beside me, clutching her duffel bag so tightly her knuckles were white. Her ribs must have been throbbing, but she didn't complain. She didn't even wince. She was a wall of steel, unbreakable, even after being thrown into danger that should have crushed someone half her age. Is the safe apartment far? I asked finally, my voice small in the quiet car. Harlow didn't look back. Yes, and that's intentional. How hidden is it? Grace asked. Hidden enough that not even the department can find it unless I give coordinates, he said. It's off-grid, no utilities tied to any name, no electronic footprint, completely analog. I let out a shaky breath. Serena excelled in environments she could manipulate digital trails, forged paperwork, controlled narratives. A place with no paper trail meant she couldn't touch us. Does anyone else know where it is? Grace asked. 2 people, Harlow said. Both retired, both living in Florida. They won't be coming back anytime soon. That's reassuring, she muttered. Micah tugged my sleeve. Mom, does Auntie Serena know where we are now? No, baby, I whispered. She doesn't. But even as I said it, a prickling sensation crawled up my spine. I didn't know if the fear was leftover adrenaline or instinct. But something felt off, like we were being watched by the night outside. I forced myself to breathe. Deep, steady. One breath after another. Harlow eventually turned onto a narrower road, then another, until we left the lights of the city behind. The landscape shifted into vast stretches of dirt-old warehouses and forgotten industrial yards. The sky grew darker as we moved farther from Los Angeles stars appearing in the expanse above. We're getting close, Harlow said at last. Grace straightened. What's the plan once we're there? I'll secure the evidence, he said, then initiate the formal chain of custody. Once that's done, the department must act no matter who Serena knows or what leverage she thinks she has. And Serena? I asked, my stomach twisting. Harlow glanced at me in the mirror. We're going to flush her out. My pulse raced. Flush her out. She won't stop hunting you until she feels cornered, he said. So we're going to let her think she's winning. And then trap her. It sounded dangerous. It sounded insane. And yet it sounded like the only way. Micah's grip tightened on my shirt. "I don't want her to catch us," he whispered. "She won't," I promised him. "Not again." He nodded, resting his forehead against my shoulder. We drove another 5 minutes down a road so narrow it felt forgotten by the world. Harlow slowed the car and turned sharply behind a row of abandoned shipping containers. The headlights illuminated a small warehouse nestled between towering stacks of rusted metal boxes. The structure looked dead, windows boarded up, paint-peeling roof sagging. "This is it," I whispered. "Yes," Harlow replied. "Don't judge by appearances." He parked the car in the shadows and stepped out first, surveying the area. Grace and I followed, keeping Micah between us. The night air was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of salt. The ocean must have been close. Harlow approached the warehouse door and tapped a specific sequence on the metal 3 knocks, pause 1 knock. Then he slid a crowbar under a rusted vent panel and pulled it aside, revealing a keypad hidden inside. He entered a code. The lock clicked. The heavy metal door swung open. Inside the warehouse was dark, but not empty. A second structure, almost like a small cabin, sat inside the larger shell, insulated, reinforced, and impossible to see from the outside. Harlow turned on a lantern. Dim, golden light filled the room, revealing a space much homier than the exterior suggested. A couch, a kitchenette, a small bunk bed, supplies neatly arranged. Micah's eyes widened. "It's like a secret fort." Harlow smiled faintly. "Something like that." Grace ushered him inside. I followed, and as soon as we crossed the threshold, Harlow shut the metal door and latched it with 3 heavy deadbolts. The silence inside felt different, deeper, safer. Grace exhaled. "This is impressive." "It's necessary," Harlow said. He set the locked briefcase on the table. "You'll be safe here, but we can't stay long. I need to take the evidence in person. Authentication starts tonight." I swallowed. "That means Serena will know soon." "Yes," Harlow said simply. "What if she finds you?" I blurted. He gave me a look, steady, unwavering. "I've handled worse than your sister. And if she tries anything, I'll have the entire IA division on her before she lifts a finger." His confidence steadied me more than I expected. Micah climbed onto the couch cautiously. "Will we be alone here?" Grace sat beside him. "Just for a little while. But we'll be safe." Micah nodded, curling his legs under him. Harlow opened the briefcase and spread the documents and flash drive across the table. "Let's review everything once more before I leave. We need the full picture." He examined each piece silently, occasionally whistling under his breath. Tight handwriting, detailed notes, overconfidence, he muttered. Classic sociopathic documentation. He looked up at me. "Your sister isn't just reckless. She's methodical. That's why we can catch her." I shivered. She wasn't always like this. Harlow gave me a long look. "She was. You just didn't see it." I didn't argue. He was right. The signs were there. I had ignored them, hopeful, desperate to believe I hadn't failed my only sibling. But Serena's love had always been conditional, always transactional, always fragile, and I never stood a chance of fixing what she refused to acknowledge was broken. "I found something else," Harlow said, opening a folder from his bag. "A report your mother filed the year before she died." My breath hitched. "A report about what?" "About Serena." The words felt like a punch. He handed me a worn, folded document. I opened it carefully. My mother's handwriting filled the margins, notes scribbled angrily, nervously. Increasingly erratic. Money missing again. Unstable attachments. No empathy. Lyora will be vulnerable. My throat burned as I read her final line. "If anything happens to me, check Serena first." I pressed the paper to my chest, unable to speak. Tears blurred my vision. Micah crawled into my lap without hesitation, his small arms wrapping tightly around my ribs. "Mom," he whispered. "Grandma knew." Yes, I whispered back. She did. Grace placed a hand on my shoulder. Your mother tried to protect you, and now we'll finish what she started. I nodded, wiping my eyes. Harlow began packing the documents back into the briefcase. I'll take these now. I need them processed before Serena realizes what's coming. When will you be back? I asked. Soon, he said. But I'll need you alert. The moment Serena panics, she'll lash out. Panics? Micah stuttered. Yes, Harlow said, kneeling beside him. Because when people like your aunt feel cornered, they make mistakes, and those mistakes will bring her down. Micah stared at him for a moment before whispering, I hope she makes a big one. Harlow smiled. I suspect she will. He stood and slung the briefcase over his shoulder. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it until you hear my knock. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Grace nodded sharply. Harlow pulled the door open, stepped into the night, and closed it behind him. The locks clicked. We were alone. The silence after he left felt strangely louder. Micah snuggled into my lap. Mom, what if Auntie Serena follows him? My heart thudded painfully. Then he'll handle it. He knows what he's doing. But she always wins, he whispered. Not this time, I said, brushing his hair. This time we have the truth. Grace stood and walked toward the small window of the inner cabin. She lifted the curtain an inch, watching the darkness outside. He's right, she murmured. She'll lash out when she realizes what's happening. We need to be ready. I looked at Micah. And we will be, together. He nodded, placing his hand over mine. Hours passed. We set up the cramped space as best we could, food on the shelves, blankets on the cot, toys for Micah made from simple objects. Grace made tea. I paced. Micah drew small pictures on scraps of paper of us, of Grandma, of a house that wasn't burning. We were exhausted, but we stayed awake. Until a distant sound echoed outside. A car. Then another. Grace went rigid. I froze mid-step. Micah crawled behind the cot again, clutching the blanket. Not Harlow, Grace whispered. He would have knocked already. My pulse quickened. Voices outside. Low. Serious. Footsteps crunching gravel. My heart hammered as one voice rose above the other's, smooth, calm, terrifyingly familiar. Serena. Find a way in, she said. I know they're here. Micah whimpered. I pressed a finger to my lips. Grace reached for my arm, her nails digging into my coat sleeve. Outside, the footsteps grew louder. Serena's voice sharpened. Tonight, she said, everything ends. Serena's voice drifted through the warehouse walls like venom seeping under a door. Quiet, poised, confident in a way that made my skin crawl. She'd found us again. Even with Detective Harlow's precautions, even with Grace's experience, even with the layers of hiding and misdirection, Serena was still one step behind us, moving closer with the kind of certainty only a predator possessed. Micah clutched my hand so tightly it hurt. I squeezed back, hoping he wouldn't feel how badly my own hand trembled. Grace lowered herself beside the window, careful not to let her silhouette show. She lifted the corner of the curtain just enough to see through. Her eyes narrowed. She's not alone, she whispered. My chest tightened. Who's with her? 2 men. Maybe the same from the house. Maybe new ones. Hard to tell in this light. But they're armed. Micah let out a soft cry. I pulled him close. My arms forming a shell around him. It's okay, I whispered into his hair. I've got you. But even as I said it, I felt the fragile edges of my certainty cracking. A car door slammed outside. Then a second. Then slow, deliberate footsteps crunching over gravel. Serena's voice rose again, calm and maddeningly composed. Search the perimeter. She's inside. I know it. Grace's jaw clenched. We need to stay quiet. The inner structure is reinforced, but if they get inside the warehouse, they'll find the inner cabin. How long until Harlow comes back? I whispered. He should have arrived at the department by now, she murmured. If he didn't get intercepted... My breath hitched. I didn't finish the thought. I couldn't allow myself to imagine Serena getting to Harlow first. He was our only chance at justice, the only one who could validate the evidence. If Serena stopped him, a loud bang sounded on the metal wall, making all three of us jump. Micah buried his face in my chest. Grace put a hand on his back. Another bang. Closer this time. Then a voice, one of the men, deep and irritated. "Boss, there's no sign of movement." Serena answered, voice dripping with certainty. "She's here. Leora never learns to leave well enough alone. She always hides. She always clings to people like Grace to think for her. She's predictable." Grace's nostrils flared, but she held her anger in check. I felt Micah tense. "Mom, she hates you." I pressed a kiss to his head. "Yes, baby. But she doesn't get to hurt us anymore." Serena's footsteps drew closer. "I know you're in there," she called out, her voice echoing inside the warehouse. "You can hide behind walls, behind lawyers, behind pathetic little saviors, but I always find you." She paused. "And I always win." A chill ran up my spine. Grace whispered, "She's testing the door." I crept to the inner cabin door, making sure the deadbolts were locked. Then I looked around the tiny space, bare walls, no furniture heavy enough to reinforce the door, nowhere truly safe to hide. If they get inside, I started. "They won't," Grace said urgently. "The outer warehouse walls are reinforced steel. They'd need equipment to get through." As if on cue, one of the men outside shouted, "Boss, we found tools in the truck." Grace shut her eyes briefly. Damn. Metal clanged as equipment was unloaded. Micah began shaking violently. "Mom, we're trapped." "No," I said, lifting his face to mine. "We're together. That means we're not trapped. We're choosing to stay hidden until we can get out safely." He swallowed hard. "I don't want Auntie to take me." The word stabbed me straight through the heart. "She won't," I whispered fiercely. "She will never touch you again." A sudden pounding on the warehouse door made all three of us jump. "Open it," one of the men demanded. Serena's voice followed smoother. "If you don't, we'll make it difficult for you." Grace pulled me aside. "Listen carefully. If they break through, and that's an if, you take Micah and run for the crawl space beneath the cabin floor." "What crawl space?" She pointed to a square patch of floor hidden beneath a thin rug. "It leads to a maintenance tunnel. Only one way out. They won't know it's there." "Why didn't you tell me before I asked?" shakily. "Because I didn't think we'd need it," she said. "Now we might." Bang, bang, bang. Metal groaned as the men attempted to pry the outer warehouse door open. Then a voice called from outside. "Police! Step away from the door." My heart leapt. Harlow. Grace shook her head sharply. "No. Too soon. It can't be him." Another voice shouted, "Drop your weapons!" Then gunfire exploded. Micah screamed. I covered him, diving behind the cot. Grace grabbed a lamp, unplugged it, then crawled toward the other side of the cabin to check the window. Shots echoed again, louder this time. The warehouse seemed to shake from the force. Micah covered his ears, sobbing. "Mom, make it stop." I held him tighter, shielding him with my whole body. Grace scrambled back toward us, her face pale. "It's not the police," she whispered. "It's another group." My stomach lurched. "Another group who?" "One of Serena's other hired teams," Grace said. She must have lost faith in the first two. She brought more. Gunfire roared again, ricocheting off metal beams. Shouts filled the air. The men Serena initially brought yelled in panic as the new attackers stormed the warehouse yard. Chaos erupted. Serena screamed orders. "Hold your ground! Find the cabin! Find them!" Grace's breath shook. "This is getting out of control." "What do we do?" I gasped. "We wait," Grace whispered. "Gunfire means chaos. Chaos means distraction. If they take each other out, we may have a window. The shouting grew louder, closer. Every thud of footsteps made my teeth clench. Micah pulled at my shirt. "Mom, I'm scared." "I know, baby," I whispered. "I'm scared too. But we're going to make it out. I promise." A loud crash echoed through the warehouse metal buckling as someone rammed equipment against the outer door. "They're coming inside," Grace said, her voice tight. Then, a sudden silence fell. Not peace, not safety, an eerie, unnatural quiet. Serena's voice sliced through the hush. "Leora, sweetheart, I know you can hear me," Micah whimpered. Serena continued. "It doesn't have to be like this. I didn't want to involve strangers. I didn't want to frighten Micah. I only wanted control of what should have been mine." Should have been mine. The words made something cold coil in my stomach. "You always had everything handed to you," Serena said, her voice echoing through the warehouse. "Mom's praise, the inheritance, people's sympathy, Micah's love. And what did I get? Responsibility, pressure, expectations." She laughed softly. "I won't be the forgotten sister anymore." Bang. The outer warehouse door groaned, bending inward. Grace gripped my arm. "Get ready." "For what?" I whispered. "For the crawl space." The metal door buckled again. Micah squeezed my hand. "Mom, I don't want to die." I cupped his face with both hands. "You won't." "I swear it." Serena's tone changed, darkening, hardening into something cold and certain. "If you don't come out, I'll burn this place too." Grace's breath faltered. She wouldn't. Oh, yes, she would. I whispered, my chest tightening. Because Serena wasn't burning houses anymore. She was burning bridges, burning boundaries, burning humanity. "We need to go," Grace said urgently. She dropped to her knees, pulling the rug aside. The small metal hatch revealed itself dusty and narrow. Another blow crashed against the outer door. Grace wrenched the hatch open. "Leora, take Micah. Go. I'll be right behind you." "No way," I said instantly. "We're not leaving without you." "Don't argue," she hissed. "The door won't hold." But before we could move, something stopped us cold. Serena's voice. But this time, it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at her men. "I changed my mind," she said calmly. "Smoke them out." My heart dropped. Micah screamed as the first tendrils of smoke began seeping under the warehouse door. Grace shoved me toward the hatch. "Go!" Gunfire erupted again as Serena barked orders. The hatch creaked. The door buckled. Smoke thickened. Micah coughed. I grabbed him and lowered him into the dark tunnel below. "Hold my hands," I begged. "I'm right here." He reached up, eyes wide with terror. Grace pulled at my coat. "I'll hold them as long as I can. You get him out." "Move." "No move." Her shove wasn't unkind. It was necessary. I slid into the tunnel with Micah, the darkness swallowing us. Smoke drifted above, but the air below was still breathable for now. I reached up for Grace's hand, but instead of climbing down, she slammed the hatch shut. "Grace!" I screamed, pounding at the metal. I heard her voice through the barrier. "Protect him, Leora. Run. Don't look back." Then a crash, Serena's triumphant voice, a scream, and the world above us exploded into chaos. I held Micah as he sobbed into my chest, his tiny body shaking with terror. "Is Grace okay?" he cried. I pressed my forehead to his. "I don't know," I whispered, voice breaking. But I knew one thing: Serena had crossed the line between dangerous and monstrous. And now she had to be stopped no matter what it took. "Come on," I whispered, grabbing Micah's hand. "We have to move." The tunnel stretched into darkness, and we ran. The air in the tunnel was colder than I expected, almost metallic against my skin as I crawled forward with Micah pressed close to me. The low ceiling forced us to move slowly, hunched over our palms, scraping against rough concrete. Behind us, the muffled chaos above grew louder, shouts metal clanging Serena's furious commands echoing like a nightmare bleeding into reality. "Mom." Micah whispered, his voice trembling. "Is Auntie coming down here?" "No," I said, though I wasn't sure. "She won't fit through the hatch. We just have to keep moving." He nodded, but his breathing stayed shallow too fast. I squeezed his shoulder. "Slow breaths, sweetheart. In, out. Good. We're okay." We weren't okay. Grace was still up there alone, injured, facing Serena and a team of dangerous men. But I couldn't think about that. Not now. Not while Micah needed me focused. A soft rumble passed overhead, dust drifting down onto our hair. Micah flinched. "What was that?" "Probably the warehouse collapsing," I whispered. "Just keep going." The tunnel stretched far deeper than I expected, a narrow artery of darkness branching beneath the industrial yard. Water dripped from somewhere ahead, echoing like tiny footsteps. It made the space feel alive, pulsing, breathing. I tried not to imagine Serena's face if she discovered the hatch we'd escaped through. After several minutes of crawling, the tunnel widened enough that we could stand barely. I straightened slowly, my spine cracking in protest. "Mom." Micah pointed to the darkness ahead. "Where does this go?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But Harlow picked this place for a reason. There has to be an exit." I took his hand. "Stay close." As we moved, my mind kept circling back to Grace. The image of her pushing me into the tunnel, slamming the hatch shut, and turning to face Serena alone carved a jagged ache through my chest. "She'll be okay, right?" Micah asked quietly, as if reading my thoughts. I swallowed hard. Grace is strong. She's smart. She's survived things before. She'll find a way. I hoped those words were true. I needed them to be true. A faint light flickered ahead, weak, barely noticeable. Micah saw it too. "Mom, look." My heart jumped. Yes, that could be the exit. We hurried toward it, the glow brightening until it revealed a small grate overhead. Dirt lined the edges and rust coated the bars, but fresh air seeped through like a lifeline. Micah pressed his face up to the grate. "I see trees." "Good," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "We're close." I inspected the edges. The grate was old, weak from age. I pushed once, nothing. Twice, still nothing. On the third push, metal groaned. On the fourth, it snapped free with a sharp clatter. I lifted Micah up first, guiding him to the surface. He crawled into the open air, turning to help me out next. As my head cleared the tunnel and I breathed in the crisp night breeze, a wave of dizzying freedom washed over me. We were outside, really outside, hidden behind a dense row of shrubs on the far edge of the industrial yard. But the relief didn't last. Gunfire erupted again, loud, sharp, terrifying. Micah jumped. I grabbed him, pulling him close. "Stay low." We pressed ourselves into the bushes. From our position, we could see the warehouse from a distance, its structure flickering orange in the dark as smoke curled toward the sky. The gunfire seemed to come from inside the yard, mixed with shouts and Serena's furious voice. "Find the tunnel!" she yelled. "I want them alive," Micah whimpered. I stroked his hair. "She doesn't know we're out. She won't find us. But we had to move now." I crouched and pulled Micah along the line of bushes, heading toward the shadows beyond the yard. My legs shook from exhaustion, but adrenaline kept us going. Just as we reached the chain-link fence separating the yard from a vacant lot, headlights flashed across the distance. I froze. Micah hid behind me. A car approached slowly, its engine humming low. It wasn't Serena's SUV. It wasn't any vehicle we'd seen before. My heart pounded wildly as the car rolled closer, stopping only a few feet away. The driver's door opened. Then a familiar voice cut through the night. Leora Micah. Tears sprang to my eyes. Harlow? He hurried toward us, his face pale beneath the streetlights. Thank God. I was afraid I was too late. I grabbed his arm. Grace. She stayed behind. Serena. She found us. There were more men, more gunfire. Everything exploded. Slow down, he said gently, gripping my shoulders. I need you to breathe. I forced air into my lungs, though it burned like fire. Harlow Micah whispered, clutching his leg. Auntie Serena was going to burn us again. His voice cracked on the word again. Harlow lifted him into his arms. Not while I'm here. Another burst of gunfire echoed across the yard. Harlow stiffened. We have to go, he said. The SWAT unit is on the way. The evidence was authenticated. We have a green light for full intervention, but if Serena gets away now, she'll go underground. We can't let that happen. I stared back toward the warehouse, terror twisting my stomach. Grace is still in there. I know, he said. We'll get her out. I promise. Harlow put Micah in the back seat of the car and opened the passenger door for me. Get in. Lock the doors. Do not get out unless I tell you. My pulse hammered. What about Serena? He pulled a tactical vest from the trunk. I'm going to find her. Harlow. If I don't stop her tonight, she won't stop hunting you, so stay here. I grabbed his arm before he turned away. Be careful. He gave a half smile. Always am. But I could see fear in his eyes, too. He sprinted toward the warehouse just as distant sirens began approaching. The moment he disappeared behind the stacks of metal containers, the night seemed to swallow him whole. Micah climbed over the seats and wrapped his arms around my waist. Mom, I'm scared for Harlow. I held him close. Me too. But he knows what he's doing. Minutes crawled by in slow agony. Then the yard erupted with flashing lights as SWAT vehicles and police vans poured into the scene. Officers swarmed the perimeter. The rhythmic pounding of boots on gravel filled the air. A loudspeaker boomed, "This is the police, drop your weapons and come out with your hands up." Gunfire answered. Micah jumped. I hugged him tight. 20 agonizing minutes passed. Shouts, thuds, commands, chaos. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. Every sound sent my heart into freefall. Then one final scream tore through the night. Serena's. Then silence. A heavy, eerie silence. A moment later, Harlow emerged from the smoke-filled yard carrying someone in his arms. My heart seized. Grace Micah cried. It was her. Her face, bruised hair matted with sweat, her left arm limp. But her eyes were open. Harlow hurried to the car, gently setting her in the back beside Micah. She's alive. She fought like hell. Grace groaned, trying to sit up. Where is she? Harlow exhaled. Serena is in custody. I pressed a hand to my mouth. The world seemed to tilt. She's alive, I whispered. For now, Harlow said. She was shot in the leg during the confrontation. She'll survive long enough to stand trial. Grace managed a weak smile. Good. She doesn't deserve an easy way out. Micah hugged her carefully. Grace, you didn't let her take us. Grace kissed the top of his head. Never. I told you I'd protect you both no matter what. I reached back and took her hand. Thank you. For everything. Sirens wailed as more law enforcement secured the area. Firefighters rushed to extinguish what remained of the warehouse. Officers moved Serena into an ambulance under heavy guard. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Harlow opened the front door. Let's get you all to the precinct. There's a lot to process, but you're safe now. Safe. The word hit me so hard I almost cried. I looked at Micah, who leaned against Grace, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Then at Harlow, steady, unwavering the anchor that had pulled us out of Serena's storm. then toward the distant flashing lights where my sister, my enemy, was finally irrevocably powerless. I exhaled shakily. "Let's go home," I whispered. Even though we didn't have a home anymore, the idea of safety of rebuilding felt closer than ever. Harlow nodded. "Yes, let's start there." And for the first time in months, I believed we actually could. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window of our new Glendale apartment, turning the steam from my coffee into a soft golden haze. It was the kind of calm I used to think only belonged to other people. People with quiet families, predictable days, and a life that didn't collapse without warning. Now somehow, it belonged to us too. Micah padded into the kitchen barefoot, rubbing his eyes, his curls messy from sleep. "Morning, Mom," he murmured, climbing into the chair across from me. "Good morning, baby," I said, passing him the little bowl of strawberries he loved. "You sleep okay?" He nodded, taking one berry and biting into it. "I dreamed about Grandma again," he said. "But it wasn't the bad kind this time. That caught my breath." "What kind was it?" "She was planting flowers. She said we were safe now. She said she liked this house better than the old one." A small tremble worked through my chest, equal parts ache and relief. "I think she would have liked it too." He smiled, a soft, genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen in so long that it always broke me a little. "Can I finish my robot this afternoon? I want to show Grace." "Of course," I said. "She'll be thrilled. She should be here for dinner." He brightened at that. Life felt steady. Not perfect. Never perfect. But steady in a way that let me breathe again. After months of survival mode, that alone felt like a miracle. When Micah disappeared into the living room to organize his pieces, I stood at the counter breathing in the stillness. I let myself think about everything we'd lost, everything we survived, everything that lay ahead. Serena had survived the gunshot during her arrest. She pleaded not guilty. She blamed her emotional instability. Our mother's death, my betrayal, anything except herself. But the evidence Harlow secured was overwhelming. At the trial, the black notebook alone sealed her fate. The recordings of her men confessing sealed the rest. 25 years. Eligible for parole in 15. When I heard the judge's sentence, my knees nearly gave out. Not because I wanted revenge, but because justice gave closure I didn't think I'd ever feel. And because for the first time Serena couldn't reach me anymore. After the trial, something inside me shifted. Instead of being consumed by what she did, I became consumed by what I could still build. The life she tried to burn down had grown roots again. And it was growing beautifully. I set my mug in the sink and walked into the living room. Micah was kneeling on the rug, sorting small robotic joints and metal connectors with surgical focus. "You're concentrating hard this morning," I said. He didn't look up. "I like this part. It's quiet." "You like things quiet these days?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "Sometimes, but not always. Just, quiet feels safe." I knelt beside him. "Quiet can be good. But you're safe, even when things aren't quiet." "Okay." He nodded, but I knew it would take time. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't neat. It wasn't fast. But Micah was resilient in ways that inspired me every single day. A knock sounded at the door, light but familiar. Micah jumped up. "Grace." He ran to answer it. I stood wiping my hands on my jeans before following. Grace stepped inside with a bag of groceries in one arm and a bouquet of daisies in the other. "Look who's up early," she said, smiling as Micah hugged her around the waist. "Hi, Auntie Grace," he said. "I'm building something special." "Well then, I can't wait to see it." She set the groceries on the counter. "And these are for you," she added, nodding toward the flowers. "You didn't have to," I said, but my voice softened against my will. "I wanted to," she replied. "Besides, your kitchen looked like it needed a little sunshine." She wasn't wrong. Our new place was simple, a steady rental paid for by the insurance money from the fire, but it felt like home in ways the Buckhead house never did. Maybe because this one wasn't built on lies. Grace and I brewed tea while Micah worked on his robot. I watched them, one determined child and one woman who had nearly died protecting him, and something warm settled in my chest. "How's your side?" I asked, noticing the way she leaned slightly on the counter. "Bruised," she said dismissively. "But alive. And trust me, alive is my favorite state of being." I laughed softly. "Thank you again. For that night. For staying. For protecting him. For protecting me." She sipped her tea. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "You would have done the same." "Yes," I whispered. "But you didn't hesitate. Not even for a second." Grace set her mug down. "You both became my family the moment Serena crossed the line, and I protect my family." The word family felt so different now, steady chosen earned. In the afternoon, Micah finally finished his robot and presented it proudly. Grace applauded and he beamed. We cooked dinner together, simple roasted chicken and vegetables, and sat around the table sharing a meal that tasted like peace. Halfway through dinner, Micah looked up. His fork paused mid-air. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. Do you miss Auntie Serena?" My hands went still. Grace watched quietly. I swallowed. "I miss who I hoped she could be, but I don't miss who she became." Micah considered that. "Sometimes I miss the good parts, the parts that were nice to me. But then I remember she wanted to take me away from you." Tears pricked my eyes. "You're allowed to miss the parts that felt real to you," I said. "But you're also allowed to be angry, to feel hurt, to feel nothing at all. Your feelings don't have to match mine." He relaxed at that. "I think I feel both." "That's okay," I whispered. "I do too." The rest of dinner passed gently with talk of school and weekend plans and the movies Micah wanted to watch. After cleaning up, he disappeared to his room to read. Grace washed the last dish and wiped her hands. "You've grown," she said quietly. "Not just survived grown. I'm proud of you." Those words pierced something deep inside me. "I'm trying." "You're doing," she corrected, "and you're teaching Micah the same." She hugged me goodbye before leaving for the evening. Once the door closed, I leaned against the wall, breathing in the quiet. Later, after Micah brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, I tucked him in. He rolled to face me, his expression serious for a moment. "Mom, are you happy now?" The question disarmed me. "Yes," I said softly. "Not because everything is perfect, but because we have a life that belongs to us now. Not someone else's control, not fear, just us." He nodded thoughtfully, curling deeper into his blanket. "Good. I wanted to make sure." I smoothed his curls back from his forehead. "Good night, my hero." He smiled sleepily. "Good night, Mom." I turned off his lamp, leaving only the hallway light glowing faintly. In the living room, I sat on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, letting the day settle around me like a soft blanket. The city hummed outside the window, a constant reminder that life kept moving forward, onward, upward. I thought about the woman I used to be, fearful, accommodating, forever adjusting myself to fit someone else's definition of family. Then I thought about the woman I was now, steady, rebuilding, choosing peace. Trauma didn't disappear. It didn't evaporate with time. But it loosened its grip. It gave space for healing. And in that space, I found purpose. I joined a local support group for women dealing with family betrayal and manipulation. I shared my story. I listened to theirs. I learned that survival wasn't the end of the journey, healing was. And healing was something you did together. My phone buzzed. A message from the support group chat lit up the screen. "Thank you for listening tonight." For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. I pressed a hand to my heart, warmth blooming in my chest. "You never were," I typed. and you never will be. Outside, the sky deepened to a gentle navy blue. I cracked the window open, letting the cool breeze sweep through the apartment. The smell of nighttime flowers floated in fresh and soft. Micah hummed from his room, a small content sound, and I smiled. He hummed again. A child who once trembled at shadows, now humming himself to sleep. That was the kind of miracle no one could take from us. Not Serena, not fear, not the fire that tried to consume us. I looked around our little home, simple furniture, warm lights, a table where we shared laughter walls that held our new memories. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were living, and we were free. If my story touched something inside you tonight, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what another woman needs to hear. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I have so many more journeys to share with you. Until next time, thank you for being here with me.